Hi everybody, welcome to another conversation with me, Clare Farrell.
I'm Charlie Gardner.
This is our podcast series, News from a World in Flux, and today we're going to have a deeper dive into the effectiveness of climate activism and protest movements. Charlie, there's been a flurry of new research that's come from the academic space about what works, what we've been doing. Tell me about it.
It's really exciting, actually, because obviously Extinction Rebellion was, when the movement was formed, it was designed based on social movement theory. We had this research about what makes social movements effective, and we designed our movement on that. But that was, that research was based on past social movements, and we don't have much evidence about the climate movement because it's really new, right? But we've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now in this new wave of climate activism, and there's now starting to be lots of research that's being carried out on the effectiveness of what we've been doing. And there's been quite a lot come out this year, and the really exciting thing is that it paints a very positive picture, and it does show that what we're doing is effective. So one piece I wanted to highlight was carried out by a research organisation here in the UK called the Social Change Lab. And they were looking at this argument that we hear all the time, right? That radical tactics or disruptive tactics are hurting our cause because they're putting people off our cause. We hear it all the time, and people are always saying that in the media. So Social Change Lab decided to test this, and they were able to design an experiment because they were aware of an upcoming Just Stop Oil protest. So remember when Just Stop Oil were doing the M25 blockades?
Yeah.
They were, Social Change Lab were aware that was going to happen. So they designed an experiment, and they asked YouGov, the polling company, to do a poll. And they polled a nationally representative sample of 1,400 people before the motorway blockades and afterwards. And they asked them all sorts of questions about, whether they'd heard of Just Stop Oil and what they thought of them. But they also asked questions about the extent to which they identified with less radical climate groups, moderate climate groups, specifically Friends of the Earth. And what they found was that 2 weeks after Just Stop Oil had done their blockades, support for Friends of the Earth increased by over 3%, which is equivalent to 2 million people in this country.
Wow.
And I just think this is really, really interesting because so there was no evidence that the JSO's actions changed people's opinion of climate policy or changed their opinion of JSO, but there was this direct evidence that shows this idea that it will just put people off your cause is nonsense, and which is, I think, it's validation for a lot of us, because it just seems quite obvious that to me and to a lot of us, I think, that no one would ever be put off from climate action by the actions of activists. You might not like Just Stop Oil, but that's never going to turn you away from climate action. It's a nonsensical idea, really. To me, it's really nonsensical. If you hate kicking puppies, right? And then you're walking along the street one day and you see a bridge blocked by some people wearing "Don't Kick Puppies" t-shirts, that's not going to make you reconsider your position about kicking puppies, is it? That's just nonsensical. But now we have the evidence.
I went to sentencing of a trial, of some other activists, and hearing a judge summing up the case and including something, I'm not going to remember the precise words, but he did include in his summing up of the case the opinion, which seemed to me completely irrelevant to what was happening in the courtroom, but he reiterated an opinion that says, and this is an important issue and an important cause, and you may even be doing damage to that cause by undertaking actions such as this. And it just really stood out to me, because I thought, this is a court, not a place for a judge to have an opinion about the efficacy of different kinds of action and communication, but also it just felt so much like it's come straight out of the tabloid newspapers. And because it gets repeated again and again and again, we know that, you know, over time, that's has a huge impact on kind of what are the available kind of stories and narratives around it that people can pick up. So, you know, look at the art department in Extinction Rebellion and their badges and patches and things that say, you know, we're not here to be liked. And you know, this has just been something I think that the movement itself has, you know, been working on this sort of premise. But yeah, it is surely sort of very helpful to be able to have academic work and research that has a methodology that you can look into and you can stand up, basically, where you say, actually, that's your opinion and it happens to be incorrect.
Yeah. So we're increasingly hearing, I think, anecdotes from different sectors of this radical flank effect in effect in real life. So I've spoken to a number of people, journalists attending big corporate meetings or people in the corporate sector who are saying to me that they are able to go and say things in these meetings that they weren't able to say a few years ago, because a few years ago what they were saying sounded really radical, but now it sounds really moderate in comparison to what other people are doing. So this is the mechanism by which the radical flank really works. Not only do we not have any evidence for this backlash of effects of the radical flank, but it has this positive effect because it makes other people seem moderate and reasonable in comparison. It stretches the over to the window, as we keep on saying. The second piece of research I wanted to talk about was carried out in Germany, and this was also published a few months ago, and it looked at the effect of climate protests on levels of public concern for climate change. And it did this quite interesting retrospective study, because in Germany they have this standardized survey that's being carried out all the time on people's attitudes to all sorts of things. But it's this standardized national survey, and because it's been going on a long time, they went and analyzed news reports of climate protests, and then just tracked public concern in relation to news reports of protest. And so they looked at protests by Fridays for Future, which is non-disruptive marches. And then they looked at protests from Extinction Rebellion and Ende Gelände, which are very disruptive. And what they found is, basically, for any random person that is surveyed is 1.2% more likely to be concerned by climate change immediately after a protest than they had been before. And like 1.2%, it doesn't sound like a lot, but there's two important things to consider there, is that levels of concern are already really high. It's already 80%, 81% of people are already concerned. So adding 1% more to 81% is quite significant compared to adding 1% to 10% or whatever. If the level of concern is really high, then making it even higher is quite something. The other thing that's really interesting is it wasn't looking at, it wasn't saying that people who are already concerned become more concerned. It was saying that people that aren't concerned become concerned. So it's actually converting people from not concerned to concerned. And I think that's really amazing. And what's interesting too is that so there was no difference between legal non-disruptive Fridays for Future and disruptive Extinction Rebellion protest, which and they were they were also looking for any evidence of a backlash effect. So yeah, what we were talking about with Just Stop Oil, this risk of a backlash, people turning against your cause. They found no evidence of that in any sector of the population. So they were able to differentiate their data according to sex and age and socioeconomic status and political leanings and stuff. And even amongst right-wing older men, there was no evidence that protests led to a reduction in concern. So we've got evidence that activism doesn't put people off. We've got evidence that it does lead to increases in concern. Another piece of research that really caught my eye was looking at the impact of activism on actual political decisions. And it was research done here in the UK. And they looked at, they wanted to see what impact that climate activism, so youth strikes and Extinction Rebellion, has had on discourses in Parliament and what effect it's had on policy. All the debates they will have in Parliament are a matter of public record. So they did a text analysis of all the discussions that happened in Parliament from 2017 to 2022. And then they supplemented that with interviews with MPs and civil servants. And they found that climate activism hugely increased the extent to which climate change was discussed in Parliament, but it also changed the narratives about climate change. The narratives became much more focused on the need for action. They became much more normative, sort of purpose driven. So it was focused on action and not just the existence of this thing. And in their interviews with politicians reveal some really striking things. And the big conclusion of their paper was that climate activism was hugely influential in changing the way that climate change is discussed in Parliament, and was a massive factor in Theresa May's net zero legislation. So soon after Extinction Rebellion really kicked off in early 2019, UK Parliament declared a climate emergency. But then soon after that, we became the first country, first industrialized country in the world to set in place a legally binding decarbonisation target. Yes, it's the wrong target. 2050 is far too late, but we were the first country to set in place a legally binding target. We actually showed global leadership, and we now have very strong evidence that happened in large part because of Extinction Rebellion, and I find that really exciting.
I've spoken to people who are sort of insiders in the kind of Westminster politics who've said to me, Theresa May chose the net zero legislation as kind of her legacy. At that point, she was deciding to do something that she knew would be like the sort of marker of her career, her work in leading the country, whatever. And that the circumstances that were created by Extinction Rebellion and the school strikes in kind of like what was a very serendipitous kind of moment of having both of those things happening at the same time, precisely created the conditions in which that led her to say, that's the one I'm going to choose. That's the thing that I'm going to do. And I think also, something else which is quite important about that moment, is that I seem to remember Greta came to the UK and she went into Westminster and she met with senior members of government. And at that time, when you think back to it, there was something very incredible about having those millions of children, walking out of school. And we know, don't we, that like activism and like protest and social movements they're these huge kind of communication devices, basically, so that you can alert people to things that they're not paying attention to, or move a conversation along at like a very accelerated pace for something that's like an extreme concern or injustice, whatever. And I think what's been clear to me, and I've heard other people, particularly I think Gail recently, I heard saying, we set up XR saying we're going to shift the Overton window on the climate crisis, how serious it is, how bad it is, and how urgent we need to respond, and also, on what would be like an appropriate thing to do in response to that. And in a way, when you look back at the sort of history of our movement, that job got done really quite quickly. And that moment in politics was, I think, a testament to that sort of, that success. I think what people are wrestling with now, which is really challenging, is not just to think, how do we heighten concern? How do we turn the volume up on the alarm? How do we get more people to realise that this is their struggle too, or that this is something that's going to affect them and that they should care about? And like you say, the research shows that the movements are bringing more people into that field of concern, rather than just sort of elevating people's perception of what's happening. But I think what's on the table for strategic sort of exploration now, and I wonder kind of where in academia there might be this kind of work going on. The question is now also, how do you get the change to actually happen? Because it's all nice for everyone to sort of breathe out and go, oh my God, we've got a net zero date in legislation and a declaration of emergency. There was mixed feelings about that in the movement, wasn't there? Like, some people went, what a relief, and a whole load of people obviously went, yeah, but it's not good enough and it's still rubbish. But now the question that seems to be very squarely on the table is, yeah, but how do you get things to actually happen? And that's where I see us as moving into, like, we're in that field of sort of inquiry now, I think, in the sort of strategic sense. Yeah,
no, I agree. And yeah, on a number of levels, on a individual level, on an institutional level. I think, you talk about people sort of breathing a bit of a sigh of relief when this 2050 target was put in place. I think that did happen, but not just within the movement, but outside of it. It's, people, it gives the impression that something is being done, that someone's in charge, that things are happening, and that gives you an excuse to sort of relax a little bit. Something's happening now, and that takes away the responsibility from me to ensure things are happening. And what we often forget is, we always talk about bottom up or top down change, individual change or system change. We forget that there's this that misses out everything in the middle. Every organization, every community, every institution has to change, and they have to be actively changed by the people that are part of those organizations. It's not just, you can't just set a target and wait for your organization to meet that. You have to actively get busy changing stuff to allow you to. And that just didn't happen. So, whereas setting a target should be firing the starting pistol on the race, right? This is when we all go and start making it happen. But that didn't really happen at all. Yeah. And I think it slightly comes down to the back to the idea of the Overton window as well. It's like Extinction Rebellion started a conversation where the conversation wasn't happening. So we started a conversation and stretched the Overton window, but it's not those at the boundary of the Overton window that are implementing change. They just create the demand for change. It's then up to everybody else to step into that space that's been created and make the change happen. Partly, people just haven't been doing that. People haven't felt the urgency to do it. Partly, as you say, we don't know how to do it. And I think, you talked about academia, what's the role for research? I think it's in change management. We've set these targets for radical change. How the fuck do we make that happen? How just in pragmatic and logistical terms, how does this change happen? And we don't have the knowledge base for that. These decades and decades of academic research haven't been asking this question because it wasn't a question that needed addressing until really, really recently. And I think it comes down to, not just institutions, but also individuals. And I think, as you say, the climate movement has been very, very successful in creating a desire for people for action, and people want to do stuff. People have been awakened by what we've done, and people are worried, and people want to do more. But there's been this massive lack of communication, I think, in terms of what people can do. So when we look at the information the guidance that's out there for individuals that want to do something, 95% of it is all about focus on your own footprint. And then, the other option that seems to be available, because I've seen it on the news, is I can go and block a road, but I don't want to do that because that's not me or whatever. So I think lots of people just feel a bit trapped because they've been asked to do something, but they haven't been told what they can do. I think there's increasing recognition across our movement that we need to move more towards engaging people and working with people and showing them the way. And I know that's something that you're working on outside of your Extinction Rebellion work. Maybe that's something you might want to talk to us about in a future episode. Or?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I read an essay recently that I think nailed something quite precise about the circumstances that we're kind of existing in right now. And it's interesting to just say, it's quite a killer combination of things to have people feeling in the economy that we have, in the kind of neoliberal reality of where we are right now in this country, the sort of endless amount of choice that you appear to have, which is quite actually overwhelming. A lot of it, focused on kind of consumer choice. You've got so much choice, there's so much stuff you can have.
I don't want 50 kinds of soap, I just want soap.
But at the same time, a sense of abject powerlessness, that you actually can't really affect the world around you very easily at all. And that is like that paradox that people are sort of living with, I think, is really a huge problem to us in, trying to get things to material actually change. And so, I've been working on various different things for the last few years outside of the kind of, I suppose, more dedicated climate space. And one of those things is a thing called the Humanity Project, and working to try and experiment with ways that people can organise their own local assemblies. So really it's for people carving out their own self-organised spaces for democratic participation where they take part together. Interestingly, we've tried a whole bunch of different ways of working, and now we've been consolidating what we've learned and moving it into like a sort of strategy to go into the next phase of work with it. But, a lot of the challenge with trying to get people to take part in something that engages them in political action or political activity together, one major sort of hump that you struggle to get over is a sense of kind of apathy, powerlessness. Nothing ever changes anyway. What can we do? Like, how can we even change anything? And so, we're really working from the starting point of saying, well, if you can get people together to talk about what they are worried about, and you can help groups of people to collectively work out how they can do something to improve their own lives in the places where they live, whatever that might be. If you want a zebra crossing outside your school, if you want to, like, you know, a different way of organising around food poverty that actually is, you know, has a more systemic approach than the sort of sticking plaster of a food bank, which you thought was temporary but seems to have been there for years and years. That, you know, beginning with people's sort of immediate concerns and helping them step into a place of empowerment and into a kind of a learning journey of understanding how you might be able to create change together as collections of people, and a sense of like that people power is possible and that it can do things. You know, it really feels like, because we're working in such kind of degraded social circumstances almost, you know, that we're going, okay, how do we begin from first steps, you know, and how can that lead us towards, you know, building more popular support for deliberative politics and ultimately for you know, systemic improvements to the politics that we have. Because, I mean, it was striking that, you know, before the last election, the majority, but huge majority of people, I think it was over 60%, wanted to see systemic political change rather than just a new party. And it's the same sentiment was there in the United States before they elected Trump. So we're seeing these kinds of political outcomes. And I suppose, you know, when we started XR, we had these theories that we've talked about, you know, changing the conversation and being able to like incentivize like more rapid and more radical action. But also we came with a political solution, which was basically get different people in a different process to look at facts and real information, and they will come up with different decisions. And that, we know it works, but we don't yet know how getting those decisions made can translate into the actual policies and the actual politics that makes all these things change in the real world. So yeah, it's a big question for me, sort of how the political and the social, it, you know, how that can start to take more like center stage. And, you know, perhaps we don't necessarily need more climate data. You know, what we really need is a better understanding about how we're going to get the stuff to change in the world that we need to see change. And, you know, and also a lot of that comes along with this great need for a vision of what that change needs to be. Because if people are crying out for a better democracy that works better for them, that they have more access to, that they feel like they're part of, that they can take part in more often than once every 4 years, no one's really painted that vision yet. And so, you know, I'm excited about the fact that there's so many people who've come through the climate space, understand the urgency, and are now trying to join the dots between like people's social realities, people's lived kind of political reality, and make it relevant and think about how we're going to collectively create a vision of something that's basically not fascism and collapse, which is clearly the direction of travel that we're on right now. And, you know, I don't really meet anybody who's denying that, whether that's like academics, think tanks, people who work in politics, activists. It's everywhere. You talk to people, it's sort of, well, yeah, things are going to break down, and yeah, far right's on the rise, and, you know, fascism and collapse is just over there. So yeah, it's exciting to me that there's a carving out of a new space, basically, where people are sort of focusing their efforts on how we're doing things, and importantly, how we're doing things that might actually cause changes to happen rather than just shift the conversation.
It's exciting to me too, because I'm not part of these conversations, and so it's really heartening and uplifting to hear that this is going on. And I really look forward to you know, hearing about the next phase and seeing how you take this work and take, you know, the experiences you've been gathering and you know, roll it out on a larger scale. So yeah, good luck with that, and I look forward to hearing you.
I think it's important to also note that like Extinction Rebellion has put lots of effort into getting communities to organise local assemblies as well. There are people from the climate movement who've gone and started really successful projects around assemblies and local organising. There are people in Cornwall who've had a great success so far with like getting real interaction with their local government, local council. There's a project in Hay-on-Wye, which is about food security and resilience for that place, and the reports that I've heard back from them is that they've got a queue at the door. They can't fit as many people in the space as want to come and show up and take part in this assembly. So I suppose the final thing to say, which will make you even more happy, is that I think the story that we can already tell about what's happening is that it's already happening. And so for me, that's really, it feels like there's a bubbling up of like a new area of work, and it's already happening in lots of places, and people are learning all over the place at quite a rapid pace about how to organise themselves and how to test these things out and find out what works, basically. So yeah, it is exciting, and it feels like there's a horizon of kind of new possibility over there with it, which is hopefully music to people's ears, to think that there's people doing this work all over the place already, and it's just going to grow, I think.
And one aspect that's exciting for me too is that this is a type of work that there aren't barriers to. Everybody lives in part of a community, and the thing with activism is that there are stories you can tell yourself that hold you back from taking part. Some people can't take part because of the circumstances in their lives. Others don't feel it's for them, whatever. But community building work is work that is for everyone, and it's work that doesn't just bring global benefits in the fight against climate change. It brings benefits to you in your community. It brings benefits to you as an individual with a sense of empowerment and purpose. And I guess what I'm saying is that for viewers that aren't able to join us on the streets, there are really exciting other things that you can be getting involved with. So please do, and please join us again for another chat soon.